This guy's been stoned since the 3rd grade.
Yes?
Yeah, I'm registered in this class.
What class?
This is U.S. history. See the globe right there.
Really?
Hey. May I come in?
Oh, please. I get so lonely when I hear that 3rd attendance bell ring and all my kids are not here.
Sorry I'm late. It's just like this new schedule's totally confusing. Yeah, I know that, dude.
Mr. Spicoli.
That's the name they gave me. Hey, you're ripping my car.
Yeah.
Hey, bud, what's your problem?
Was some phenomenological, and that's the word I'm using, strange phenomenon happening all over the world. And let's get right into the skies lit up, and they're claiming it on a power transformer, blowing, and it's an eerie glow. But what's more important is happening in the island of Maui, the Hawaiian Islands. It's happening on the West Coast. It's happening in Louisiana, which just happens to be one of the major hubs for one of the telecommunications companies. People were down on their internet all yesterday, and people were having phone problems and cell problems. I think what we need to do, Sheila, is give people a wake-up call. Now, I'm not talking about an EMP. Here's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a selected attack on the grid that can be blamed on anything, but where events can take place beyond the perusal, beyond the seeing or the hearing of the people that are being involved, targeted, or whatever. The ionization of the upper atmosphere has been one of my concerns since I first broke and this is a fact, I broke the chemtrails story 2 decades ago. The question I posed then is what I think now we're seeing the cause and effect of. What happens when major nations are making war on each other using weather warfare and modification? Yes, it does exist. Weather is a force multiplier. We own the Weather 2025. People can go up and look that up. But at the end of the day, we're like a reverb. We're living in a reverb chamber where all of these various signals that are scattered, that are bouncing off, that are deflecting off each other, and couple that in with new weapons, plasma-based weapons, with all the wireless towers and now the coming 5G. By the way, my name for 5G is Pentadeath. P-E-N-T-A, death. Pentadeath. Everything we think, do, and say is being not only recorded, we're being told now that we're going to see broadcast thoughts into our brains and our thoughts being read. So what I think is important for this day is people understand there's 2 words that I just can't get off my spirit: content and context. We are now living in the time where all of the content is being placed into the context of the end times. And Sheila, I want to make a very clear distinction for people, because there are people out there writing blogs, and I've corrected a couple of them, and I believe rightly so. When Jesus made the statement that no man knows the day nor the hour, not even the angels, except his Father in heaven, that's concerning the second coming specifically. It has nothing to do, and I repeat, nothing to do with the end times, with the exception of all the events that will lead up to the return of Jesus Christ. So I'm seeing people saying, well, no, man, this isn't the end times, this isn't the end of the age. Grow the historic reality up. How's that for being nice? The kinder and gentler 2019 Steve. The point being is that for people to make that idiotic statement, they would have to basically dismiss Matthew 24, Luke 21, the book of Revelation, all the prophets in the Old Testament, especially Daniel, Zechariah. Everything that God has written is to warn us, because he declares, behold, I am the only one that can declare the end at the beginning. And that's an actual scripture. So the point being is that we have to put an end to that, and people have got to wake up. Now, you weren't unfortunately able to be at Branson, but I think I was on your show. I kept stating over and over and over that the word normal, after Branson, September 15th, 16th, that everything would change and the word normal would no longer apply. So now, here's the thing. Everything that we've known, we've been blessed for, taken for granted, everything from peace, the 4 horsemen, the apocalypse, and I would encourage everyone to go and read the book of Revelation. I want to make something clear. The book of Revelation is not the book of just bad stuff. It's a revelation that God gave to his servant John, the apostle, on the island of Patmos concerning the Lord Jesus Christ. It's the revelation of Jesus Christ. And all the scrolls being opened, there's only one worthy to open, if you will, the end-time scenario, and that's Jesus himself. Because he is, when he said before Abraham was, I am, he was making a very clear statement. So you and I have been tasked, if you will, called, I think is a better word, to try and get people to face the reality and, choose ye this day whom you're going to follow. So we've got the same events happening. We're having them happen in this country in select areas. I put up the article that you sent to me on Louisiana and the eyewitnesses. And did you notice, Sheila, the sounds in the background?
Yes, absolutely. And not only the noise, but the sight. You can actually see clear beams in all of these strange electromagnetic explosions, quote unquote. Of course, this ominous turquoise blue light explosion over New York City. Now, the media was quick they're saying, oh, it's just a Con Edison facility in Queens.
Yep.
Nothing to see here. But New York City
Yep.
was ablaze in this eerie, pulsing blue light. Now, not only power outages, Steve, but it delayed flights. It sparked a social media storm about, jokes, about an alien invasion, but it caused ground stops at LaGuardia. It impacted subway service. It knocked out the internet. And of course, Cuomo comes on this morning. Oh, nothing to see here, just electrical failure, quote unquote. Now, interesting, as you alluded to, these sparks lighting up the Louisiana sky Thursday morning. Now, did you also notice, Steve, that in both scenarios, I watched the footage and, it's very reminiscent of the California, these directed energy weapons that started these explosions, the fires. There was internet shortages that were going on all over cities. The 911 service, of course, knocked out in many states. People getting weird text message alerts on their phones. So now, as if that wasn't strange enough, Steve, couple that with all these mock grid drills, these DARPA and DHS and FEMA power grid drills, the cyber attack drills. Is all this just one big coincidence? Yeah, I don't think so, Steve. Something is very, very strange.
Well, I think not only strange, but it's the agenda. Now, let me share something. I didn't notice until, moments ago, and as we're recording this show, Sheila, that people are reporting mile-long UFOs, okay? Now, I want to share something with everybody. If you understand how UFOs fly and how they can derive energy from the fields around them, it's called electrogravitics. That's a propulsion system. But in the area of Louisiana, people were stating that they saw something as big as a mile wide. I personally met with a man who's passed away now, gone to glory, that sat me down with a witness. I won't say who the witness is. 2 eyewitnesses. He had us come to Colorado. We flew to Colorado and shared with how advanced the space technology was. And he said, Steve, they have these things and can make them 5 miles wide. Now, that's beyond most people's ability to embrace. And the way they power them is through an amazing technology that's so advanced that, again, everything you see in rockets and everything else, Sheila, that's just for public consumption. The real stuff exists. You use the word directed energy weapon. These ships, and let's just call them base ships, can cloak. That means they can go invisible, they can stay suspended in the air, and they can fire their weapons pretty much at will with so much power that it's the stuff of science fiction movies. And you had sent me a story earlier today specifically concerning the directed energy weapons and the eeriness of the new Spider-Man movie. Do you want to go into that? Because I want to share something. Everything that's out of Hollywood is basically the elite's agenda being thrown out there, and you and I have talked about Satan has to tell the people what he's going to do, and all the people that should be paying attention to this stuff just laugh it off. Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's also interesting that they're making a joke on social media about alien invasions. But yes, so weird side note, Steve, I was actually researching 2 movies this week. One on marine spirits, because I think they're really acclimating us for that with Aquaman. But also I watched Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse for research, as it's all about opening portals, dimensions. So get this, Steve, there's a scene where Spider-Man is fighting this villain, Kingpin. Now, this is the kicker. It looked identical. You could have literally taken that cartoon scene. It was identical to this ominous turquoise light flashing with these weird transformer exploding type lightning. And the kicker was the movie scene is not only in New York in the exact same spot where this electrical lightning transformer explosion happened, not only is eerily similar, but it's reminiscent of right something out of Terminator. I mean, something stinks in Denmark with all this.
Well, actually, it stinks throughout the country, and the nationwide CenturyLink outage, it not only is affecting, they say Colorado, you look at their map, and it's the entire East Coast, the West Coast, and through the Mid-America, and even in parts of Alaska. Now, the question is, and I don't have the answer to this yet, but it would be interesting to find out if the New York situation and the Louisiana situation happened somewhat simultaneously. And for the record, ladies and gentlemen, I've seen personal transformers blow up with lightning, and it's nothing like what we are seeing in New York or Kenner, Louisiana. What we're seeing is basically, in my opinion, we're seeing the plasma burst from some form of hidden. When I say hidden, I don't mean just that you don't know about it, that it exists, but this is too freakish and weird. When you ionize the atmosphere and when you're dealing with chemicals, Sheila, we're dealing with aluminum and barium, which, have really deleterious effects on human beings if you look at the material data safety sheets. But what is problematic is we're in a personal lightning storm environment with 5G and all the particulate fallout that's coming from the chemtrail spraying. I've always worried, and I'm a worrier, okay? I've always worried about the context of time when the plasma weapons and, if you will, the various forms of electromagnetic and scalar energy and other, let's say black developments in the area of weapons would converge in the perfect non-human directed storm. Now remember this, we're told in the Bible, and listen, I want to hopefully provoke Christians to start sticking up for Jesus, speaking up, because we are in the end times. Don't settle for that horse manure, no man knows the day or the hour. Everything's changing, and look at what's happening around the world, and Krakatoa, and I've been warning Krakatoa. Sue Bradley wrote the warning on Krakatoa. Anak means son of, like Anak is son in the Indonesian language, but Anak in the Bible is the king of the giants. And what we were telling people back then, Sheila, was that there's something about Krakatoa exploding. Not what you're seeing now is an eruption. What's going to happen is it's going to explode, and the release of the giants worldwide, because Anak is the root word Anakim. And so that's what Joshua and Caleb saw when they went into the land of the giants. Now, fast forward with me, and you and I have talked about this, the electromagnetic, and I call it terror forming, Terror forming versus Terra forming, terraforming, because what I was told about 8 years ago when I was dealing with some people that lived in a world that most people cannot even understand, that doesn't make me special. It's just they chose to tell me and to warn the people what was coming of technology so advanced. But one of the generals, a 4-star general, told me, he said, Steve, they are terror-forming the earth to make it hospitable to the return of the giants. Those are the words. Now, obviously, you take a lot of guff, you take a lot of mocking, ridicule, scorn, but right now, how do you, Sheila, I know you're thinking about it, if everything that you're seeing in the movies and just the Spider-Man is telling what they're coming, isn't it interesting that all the video games now have gone into the occult, that now they're going after Jesus and Christians, and woe unto them who call evil good and good evil.
That's right. This is like the frog in the boiling water. They're completely acclimating us for this return of the ancient godmen. That's what all these occultists were so obsessed with. And this is what they've been doing throughout the ages. It's the return of the Nephilim, the return of the Titans, the Olympians. What do you think Atlanteans is all about? And speaking of chemtrails, because of course that's what these globalist Satanists always also want to do, is they want to get rid of a big chunk of the population, like good old Mr. Philanthropist himself, Bill Gates, who has a penchant for vaccinating everybody on the planet. What did he just say last week? if we don't do something about global warming, hey, it's going to kill us. So he's all in favor of shooting these noxious chemicals in the air to dim the sun. Oh, that's the latest thing in the green agenda. The Agenda 30, by the way, is to shoot particulates. Now, here's what's interesting, Steve. So I was researching barium and aluminum. When you look up element information, the properties on the periodic table, barium is Ba. Barium symbol is Ba. So now picture that. Now aluminum is Al. If you put them side by side, you get Baal. Bale. As in all these arches of Baal returning. We're under the spirit of Baal right now, folks. But yeah, it spells Baal. Isn't that interesting? I thought
wow.
Yeah.
That's astonishing. I never noticed that. Kudos. And look at this, too. Look at the prevalence of giant statuary, whether it's the god Anubis, whether it's the Arch of Baal going across the country. Look, the fallen ones, what did Jesus also say about Lucifer? He saw him fall as lightning. And so when we're seeing the literal annals of Greek mythology, which in my opinion, if you substitute the word fallen angels for the Titans, and the giants for the Olympians, then you get the whole thing. And I want to make something clear to everybody. We are now in the return of the portals, if you will. The gates of hell have opened. We've all been talking about that for pretty much more than a decade. And now that it's upon us, it is becoming more flabbergasting, and it's also unnerving the people of God. And I say this not with any unkindness. When everybody has been told they're going to be out of here in a pre-tribulation rapture before things get tough, I say to you, please, ladies and gentlemen, at least have a back door if you hold that position, which I believe has neutered the entire end-time message. It was Satan's antidote for the reality of the Word of God. And I'm saying this. I know, don't send me all your proof texts because you can't do it. I have seen the end of the age. And Sheila, you've heard my testimony. I don't control when God releases stuff that he hid from me only until the days it's going to be released. You remember, you've heard me say that. The Lord would release it to me. And I'm telling you this, right now, I literally tremble with what I see coming. And people say, well, tell us what you really know. I won't tell anything until the Lord says it's time. And it's time that the people of God wake up and find out the lateness of the hour. Because when Jesus himself asks, when the Lord returns, will we find faith in the earth? I'm telling you this, that people do not get it. They better get it, because right now, one of the stories I posted on my website, been talking about it for years, you and I have talked about it on the air for years, is the mark of the beast. And when you've got U.S. News and World Report and others, and we've seen the marking of every Chinese person and the Indian underway, and now Venezuela embracing that story, then people have got to understand that Christians will have to make a choice. Now, I know there are those out there who are well-known Christian figures saying, oh, that's not the mark of the beast because you'll be out of here in a pre-tribulation rapture. That's just a necessary thing. No, no, no. But have you ever considered, Sheila, the day, and this is rhetorical, I know you have, that people who are Christians will be so denigrated, if not annihilated, that they will either toe the line or they'll say, you don't have a mortgage anymore, you don't have a job anymore. We're already seeing that with vaccinations. Have you ever taken it to its logical conclusion and putting it into a 20th century context?
Well, I just see it as absolute dull contempt for humanity, and that's nothing new for the enemy. And also total and absolute control over every aspect of people's lives. We are racing at Mach speed towards a complete Orwellian 1984 style society. Brave New World has nothing on where we're headed. Facial recognition technology. You said Venezuela, the government there is tightening its grip on the people's data, their communication, developing that Orwellian biometric ID with that fatherland card. It's not bad enough that we're seeing all this biometric stuff, but now we're steamrolling into the microchip. You and I have warned for years, Steve, that microchips for tracking and identification were coming. Well, look at this Swedish company, BioNTech. biohacks. 4,000 people in Switzerland implanted with microchips. You've got about 800 customers using the chip for travel. These sheep are just lining up to be hacked and tracked. You know, when it comes to the church, nothing to see here, Steve.
Well, and that's the other thing, too, that is troubling to me. We have the Turks getting ready to go into Syria, and if anybody wants to understand why Erdogan, the president of Turkey, made the statement, there is no such thing as peaceful Islam. The idea that peace and Islam are together only can be best illustrated by those two girls, those two naive, I think they were, Swedish girls that were beheaded in Morocco, and the horrid, and I didn't watch it. I want to make everyone clear that. I won't watch that stuff. I've seen it before. But the idea is that there's somehow peaceful Islam. I want everybody, Sheila, to go back and remember the Armenian genocide that the Turks, when they invaded Armenia, they have got to understand it. You're dealing with a man who is on record, President Erdogan, is he wants to be the caliph or the head guy for all of Islam.
Yeah.
Pray for President Trump, everyone, that God will get someone to him to speak to him to understand. Because I've seen stories, I don't believe it, I hope it's not true, that General Wesley Clark said that Trump has been blackmailed by Erdogan. Well, here's the deal. Please, brethren, pray for our Syrian brethren and the Christians in the Middle East, because they are being wiped out. And Sheila, every pulpit that's silent, may God literally bring those pastors before him before they die, show them the evil fruit, because they're deceiving the sheep, they're setting the sheep up for the slaughter, they're butchering them with their lifestyles, and they're trying to basically keep everyone away from reality, because if the pastors preach the truth, the people would prepare, and guess what? There wouldn't be that much money now for the new Lamborghini for the wife, or, the fifth jet you need to haul your sorry behind around the world. Here's the thing. Pastor Langford laid it out. I don't think people understand the significance of compromise and lukewarmness, and I call that a vomitous indictment against American Christianity. There's so much, Sheila, that's going on that is not spoken about, and this is what breaks my heart. It truly does break my heart, because I go, Lord, what do we care about? Seriously, as a believer, and thank God for Franklin Graham. Thank God.
Seen anything like this right now?
What a very perilous time we're living in, and what amazing revelations are coming forth as to the true nature of the secret government, the true Luciferian control of the mainstream media. When Jesus said that the love of money is the root of all evil, not money, but the love of it, the control of the money of the world is the control of all evil. And now we're seeing the full surveillance society, the all-seeing eye of Lucifer, obviously Orwell's telepresence, coming into our lives in such a, I would say, formidable manner. Facebook, I'm not on Facebook, though I have a managed Facebook account, because at one point there were literally hundreds of people pretending to be me on Facebook. So I have Rhonda who monitors that. But here's the deal. I called it Faces of Death Book. Now everything is going to facial recognition. Everything is going to be able to brain scan, read our minds. The pre-crime that was shown in Minority Report, all of science fiction has been headed this way. And right now, I'm choosing my words very carefully. I don't believe that people recognize that God, in using Donald Trump as a prosecuting attorney, is absolutely showing America's leaders, the sins of the leaders, to the people. And I'm talking about senators, I'm talking about congressmen, I'm talking about the elite, and the people's sins before a holy God. Look at the rampant Satanism, the rampant demon worship, the rampant child sacrifice, the rampant cannibalism, the rampant blood sacrifice, the mockery of the Lord Jesus Christ, the cowardice of the professants. Now, a professant just means somebody who claims to be a follower of Jesus but would never speak his name unless they offend somebody. And Sheila, I said it on your show before, but one time the Lord asked me a question, and I was bemoaning the fact that, God, it bothers me. The thing that bothers me most in the whole world is the fact that people who claim to be Christians are so quiet about Jesus. And I asked the Lord, I said, Lord, you you know this is really bugging me? And I didn't get an answer at that point. But out of the blue, he spoke to me. I don't know if it was a couple days later or 3 or 4 days, but within a week, let's say, he said, Steve, how many of my people take me seriously when I stated, except ye confess me before men, I will not confess you before my Father, which is in heaven. I said, well, Lord, you know the answer to that, but my sense is that people don't believe your words, so therefore they don't understand the responsibility. And Sheila, you and I deal. Obviously, you're a talk show host. I'm a talk show host. We've talked on the air now for years, but you know that so few of Christians are taking up the name of Jesus in power and authority that the whole world is languishing at the hand of the devil. That is my opinion, and if someone would prove me wrong, because now what we've got a civil war in our country brewing. God has stripped the veneer, the fake covering of everything, and I believe this goes to the statements, and sorry, you know, I've never claimed to be a prophet. I'm not. But I do know this. When I stated 5-6 years ago, before God allows Russia and China to nuke the United States, he would reveal the sins of the leaders to the people and the people's sins before a holy God. At that point, there was no talk of World War III. There was no open hostility between Russia and the United States, China and the United States. It was always being done in the background with spies. Now, in the last 72 hours, probably going into 96 now, but let's just say this, in the last 3 to 4 days, the headlines, China prepares for war with the United States. Russia prepares for war with the United States. And let me share with everybody what Russia's position is. Putin made the statement, if history has taught him anything, they who strike first win. Now, here's the issue at hand, because this is the exact quote from Dmitry Duduman, a Romanian pastor. The angel that's talking to Dmitry Duduman, by the way, if people don't understand, the Bible says in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. This is very similar to Henry Gruver's vision, but here's the angel speaking to Dmitry Duduman, September 1984. He said, remember this, Dmitry, the Russian spies have discovered where the nuclear warehouses are in America. When the Americans will think that is peace and safety from the middle of the country, some of the people will start fighting against the government. The government will be busy with internal problems. Then from the ocean, from Cuba, Nicaragua, Mexico, he told me 2 other countries, but I don't remember what they were. They will bomb the nuclear warehouses. When they explode, America will burn. And then Dmitry responds to the angel, what will you do with the church of the Lord? How will you save the ones that will turn towards you, I asked. He said, tell them this, how I saved the 3 young ones from the furnace of fire, and how I saved Daniel in the lion's den is the same way I will save them. Now, that's a pretty powerful word. Now, again, I want to put this into perspective. I understand that anybody who tells the truth is considered negative. I've been accused of everything. People say, why do you spend so much time defending yourself? I'm not defending myself. I'm defending the word of the Lord that is literally coming to pass, that people mocked, ridiculed, scorned, made light of, said I was a fear-monger, said I was a doom-horn purveyor. Yet right now, Sheila, we are at the point, since if the Democrats don't win, there's going to be blood in the streets. Well, good night. There's so much blood on the hands and on the lips of the Democrats and all the Satanism. And you know what's fascinating to me? Even on Matt Drudge today, and today is, 30th of October, it shows Hillary as a witch dressed up for Halloween. So, ladies and gentlemen, the other day when I saw Hillary Clinton quoting the words of Jesus, suffer the little children as to come unto me, knowing what she's involved in, knowing all of the occult rituals that she's known to have partaken in, this is maddening, but it's also a slap in the face. Now, let me jump back to Dmitry Duduman. 8 years or 9 years later, after Dmitry said there were 2 other countries that he couldn't remember the names of, I'm taking a shower, and out of the blue, the Lord said, Steve, the 2 nations that you've been pondering in your heart are Germany and France. Now, Germany has gone, basically, we stole all our gold. You know, the fact that obviously Donald Trump recognizes Angela Merkel for who she is and what she is. The Illuminati and the globalists intend intend to destroy Western civilization by tearing down the foundations, the borders, the language, the culture, and the history of individual nations. Because remember, they want a giant blob of New Age goo, okay? G-O-O. It's like some late 50s movie of the Blob, this kind of black tar mass that just absorbed everything in its path. I remember Art Bell, when I first went on Coast to Coast, decade and a half ago or whatever, maybe 2 now, I think his statement was, well, I sure hope not, and I don't think that will happen. And it's happening now. So, Sheila, just as you read the headlines and see everything going on, when it comes to insanity, Sheila, there is no end to it. When it comes to perversion, there is no end to it until Jesus puts an end to it. And the collective mindset of the American citizenry openly has been attacked by MK Ultra and mind control experiments at the highest levels. Of a former head of the CIA made the statement that will know our efforts have been successful when everything the American people believe is a lie. See, the problem is even, I think it was either Goering or Goebbels or Goebbels, a Nazi that made the statement, thank God people don't think. And I want to make this clear. For all you atheists and agnostics that will listen to this broadcast, don't you think it's funny that those who don't believe God exists go out of their way to make sure they put their 2 cents worth in? And they can't even name the name of Jesus because the Bible says that at the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow, every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord unto the glory of God the Father. So the point is that what we're seeing, Sheila, is, in my opinion, the reckless abandonment of the faith. We're seeing situational Christianity. We're seeing now even Christian groups embracing Marxism, cultural Marxism, claiming that Jesus was a social revolutionary. And that just is astonishing to me.
But what's more astonishing to me, Steve, is how the church is in a candy-coated coma. There was actually, I posted this, I was so stunned. A practicing minister says Christians can also be witches. Hey, nothing to see here with biblical warnings. And many people are embracing that ideology. It wasn't bad enough on October 20th. All the witches in the world came together to hex Brett Kavanaugh and bind Donald Trump. Of course, we've seen that in front page news headlines. But this is the kicker, Steve. It was the actual spells, the incantations, the hexes they were performing were being broadcasted on NBC. What planet is this?
Well, I can tell you this, NBC, look up, what is the emblem of the NBC broadcasting company? What it is a peacock, and the peacock is the sign of one of the Greek goddesses. And the Greek goddesses, you go back to mythology, okay? The peacock is a sign of the goddess, the Greek goddess Hera, the consort of Zeus. And what you're looking at, ladies and gentlemen, it's just like CBS. What's CBS? It's like the all-seeing eye on the top of the pyramid. So when you're looking at all this stuff, even look at the names of the planets. Look at the moons of the specific planets. They're all named for mythology. Now, where does it sound like, Sheila? It's Genesis 6, when the gods, and by the way, there's 2 groups of gods in Greek mythology. They're the Titans, which would be the fallen angels, and then they're the Olympians, which would be the giants. And so what's fascinating is it's all back in our face right now.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's really nothing new under the sun. And don't you see a theme of all, you mentioned Titans, you mentioned the Olympians. Every video game we see now is Apollyon, Abaddon. There's all these, not just demonic entities, but all these ancient Egyptian gods and goddesses, the Ammonites, the Amorites, the Grecian, the Roman. This really is a reemergence of all the god men, really.
Yes, and that's really important. We've had Egyptian gods paraded through the United States, Anubis. We've had the Arch of Baal, which Baal was that, and he whose sacrifices of young children were made. The old gods are back. On the Empire State Building, we've seen Kali, the Hindu destroyer. We're seeing, if people really take a look, what is the patron saint of CERN? You have the cosmic destroyer in Hindu mythology as the patron saint, as the symbol of CERN. In essence, CERN is saying this: they're going to be able to destroy and recreate the Earth. Now, they make fun of those of us who talk about this, but remember, they are the ones who use the Hindu god. It was the same thing that Oppenheimer, the famous atomic scientist, said. You know, he has become the destroyer of worlds. Nothing is happening by mistake. Nothing is happening by chance. It is all being planned.
Absolutely, it's being planned, and it's been in the works for a lot of years. It's the Cloward and Piven strategy. It is absolutely rules for radicals on steroids. You know, I didn't call it caravans. I called it Soros-sponsored invasion forces. We see what's going on at that southern border. Now the United Nations telling Trump, oh, no, you're not going to send the military there. The UN as a whole, that Bravo Sierra hole, we need to shut that thing down. But it's just the convergence and the culmination of everything. And then you've got these Soros evangelicals that are selling us out. You know, it's not bad enough we have the clergy response team that was selling us down the river. If it wasn't for Trump, Steve, I am convinced we'd all be in a FEMA camp right now.
I believe that too. And listen, there are professors out there that claim that all of us who have made the statement about Donald Trump as Christians are all deceived. You know, it's fascinating to me, Sheila, that Trump gets the Christian missionary that was held in Turkey released. He gets the Christians in South Africa, he bought them time when Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, was talking about cutting
that's, medical decisions are up to the individual, and I suggest people do their own research when they make those decisions.
Yeah, that I agree with. I agree that everybody should make their own decisions. Totally.
And do so with as much information as you can get, especially in this day and age of, frankly, of censorship. And you have to do a little extra digging to get to things. And this is a issue that's really fraught with controversy for me, and I think for everyone it should be. So you've been doing some amazing work. I mean, you've been doing amazing work for years, as Jay's analysis and up on YouTube. You're one of the most knowledgeable people when it comes to issues of faith and where it intersects with politics. But you've been doing some pretty deep dives on the issue of satanic imagery in culture. And it seems to me that it's becoming, your book, Esoteric Hollywood, gets into all of the various satanic imaging that's in various films, but it's the sort of thing that's kept a little bit under the hood, so to speak. I mean, most people, when they see that, they either think, oh, this is trendy or it's cute. They don't really think that it's too much in your face, even though when you look at it and you come to understand it, you see that it is. But I think that now, this year especially, maybe the pandemic, the Great Reset, whatever it is, it's no longer all that hidden. I mean, it's right out there in the open. We could talk about the halftime at the Super Bowl. We could talk about Nas X and his thing. One of the most satanic, things I've seen come down the pike, and that's available at YouTube. And a lot of other things. So what do you say on that, Jay? Do you think that it's now something that's just out there and open, and if so, why?
I remember one of the, it's either Alice Bailey or Blavatsky has a book about how it would be an unveiling. Eventually, they wouldn't have to hide the attitude that they have of the esoteric. So I think we've entered into that aeon where they think it can all be in the open, and that's actually now that traditional religions have been weakened, it can now be open to the darker side. And so they actually do speak that way. I think there is something to that. I was just reading about Michael Aquino. I think he's a key figure to understand in this regard, because if people don't know, he eventually became the Army's head of psychological warfare. And he wrote a few books. Actually, went and read his books a couple of years ago. One of them was the document about mind war to psi war, which is how the Army would adopt a new approach to psychological warfare. And he even cites in that essay, it's the doctrine, the Army's doctrine of psychological warfare. And he says in there, the principles that you find in black magic and the satanic could be very relevant to targeting people or populations or the enemy in psychological operations. And what I think is interesting is that when you read that essay, he's actually not talking about some foreign enemy. He's talking about all of the domestic population, humans, anybody that's not kind of in that upper so-called elite or social Darwinian, more evolved structure. And that's, of course, why he found, I think, so many of the pagan philosophies, you know, the even the Nazi philosophies relevant to his worldview. And then what he did was he sort of co-opted a bunch of those, and then he created his own group after he sort of moved out of the Anton LaVey kind of more pop Satanism. He created a more serious satanic sect called Temple of Set. And I noticed too, I many years ago, I read, I'll never be able to find where it was, but he had recruited different military. I don't know how high the military brass was, but he had recruited several military people into his cult, and then was, of course, under investigation at the Presidio for child abuse and all this kind of stuff. But he had even gotten people into the Club of Rome. There was one of the members of the Club of Rome. Of course, that's with Maurice Strong and all these other characters who believe that, you know, the Earth needs to be radically depopulated. Most people need to be killed, all this kind of stuff. And in fact, he even had somebody at that highest level of the Club of Rome in terms of making, you know, global policy decisions about the environment and killing most people and all that. So in other words, even at that level, there were people that believe it's a kind of a satanic sacrifice. So what I think we're seeing is the usage on many different levels of the dark arts, dark sorcery, etc., for the power structure. And then in the power structure, some people believe it and some people don't. And the ones that don't just see it as a useful kind of tool for changing culture, turning people into more brutalized animal type people, you know, more bestial, making man more bestial, theater brutality, this kind of stuff. So I think that's what's going on with the infusion of that into pop culture. And I was just using Aquino as one of the key examples of that.
So we see what I think you're describing is an intersection between America's and, I would argue, the world's officially sanctioned secret societies, which are the things like the CIA and other agencies that actually we know are secretive because that's what their job is, and their use of satanic ritual, or I don't know if I'd go that far, but I'd say satanic principles as a means to study mind control, as a means of studying population control, world control. And, you know, it's not like they're all sitting around in some smoke-filled room. It's not like they all necessarily agree with each other, but they all have this same general trend. It continued to go further deep and broad, even after the defeat of the Nazis, which of course they were totally into this. And MK Ultra being an American program that actually officially was disbanded in the 1970s, but I think that even the church committee, which exposed it, acknowledged that elements of it would continue, except not necessarily officially. I mean, it would be, you know, pretty much off the books. And that the idea was to control the population through various means of manipulation, including actual, frankly, population control. Would you say that's what we're looking at?
Absolutely. I think that's the overriding plan. That's half of it. The other half is to then mutate and kind of try to steer evolution to move post-human, to go beyond the human. Right. If you read The Philosophy of UNESCO by Julian Huxley, that's what he says.
Yes.
And he even includes all the points that you just made about, you know, basically killing most people off. And he says all of that race hygiene that the Greeks did, that the Nazis and even the socialists, the other socialists all had a version of this too. He said all that, we'll just rebrand it. Just instead of calling it that, call it biometrics, call it population control, but it's all the same philosophy. And it's the idea that through science, we can tweak and mess with creation such that we can fix it, right? Because it's broken. So technology can be the great work that can fix this and make man perfect.
Right. Julian Huxley, he was the grandson of A.F. Huxley, who was Darwin's main promoter, and who basically patented the idea of literally having debates with pastors and religious people to try to mock and minimize faith in God and faith in the Bible, which was a predominant view at the time. His brother was Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World and who tried to warn the world, actually, about what he called an international chemical concentration camp, as in the drugging of all people, and that he predicted that most people in the world would be taking some sort of controlled substance at some date. And that actually has turned out to be true.
Right.
And he committed suicide on the same day that, using drugs, and he filmed it on the same day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated, so it didn't get the kind of attention that it would have.
Wow.
His Julian Huxley founded UNESCO, which was supposed to be the World School Board, in 1947, and that he wrote a book that talks about exactly what you're saying. He would take the idea of eugenics, which was a big progressive movement, and let's not forget, before World War II, people like Margaret Sanger. I mean, the main opponents to eugenics were the same people that oppose abortion today, the Catholic Church and conservatives. And he said, well, because of the bad stench of the Nazis and the Holocaust, we're going to rebrand it. And so, they gave it different names, and they called it, he referred to evolutionary humanism, which basically put evolution on the scale of a religion. And that he wrote about that they would leave in place all the trappings of religions, the rituals, the incense, the marriage ceremony, the burials, but they would take away the philosophy and the faith and replace it with evolutionary humanism, which is essentially worship of Darwin's idea that we are an evolving species and that there are superior members of that species, and that out of that superior group, after the weaker members fall by the wayside, will pop out this new species.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what, and you've talked about this, Jay, that is exactly what transhumanism is all about. Development of a new human species that is superior to who we are today, and that will be made up of this elite that you accurately note are studiers, at least of the principles, if not the practice of satanic ideas. Talk a bit, if you will, about, because I know you've been doing some work on transhumanism and what that is and where we can find out about it.
This, I think, again, also has its roots in the ancient world, probably in the pagan philosophies of the empires, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, and then kind of filtered more so specifically into the Greeks with their idea of techne. Now, I don't think that they thought necessarily that you could create a machine that would, do all this stuff, but the basic principles of techne are in the Greeks, the basic ideas of perfecting of nature, this kind of stuff, and transcending nature. That's a very Hellenic idea, because for Plato and a lot of the Greek philosophers, the world is evil. It's a prison. It's trapped us here. It was created by some demiurge, some evil deity, this kind of stuff. So they have an anti-natural, anti-creation type of view, and so the goal is to get outside of this prison. If you were to watch a movie like 2001 by Kubrick, I think you kind of see the repeating of that same mindset, that we are stuck in this kind of limitations of spatio-temporal, 6 dimensions, time and space, or a prison. And at the end, Bowman kind of like gets out of the limitations and becomes a god. He becomes Star Child. That's kind of repeating the idea. But in the modern world, I think when we get up into the French theorists like Saint-Just, Auguste Comte, Saint-Simon, these guys that were influenced by Weishaupt, influenced by Marx, influenced by, Marx comes later, but they're all in the school of socialism, of communism, of Marxism. And they have
also, right?
exactly right, and they have this idea that I mean, you could say it's Promethean, basically the myth of Prometheus, that we could, steal the fire of the gods. We can master the principles of technology to overcome the imperfections of nature. Bacon, of course, is very important in this. Bacon's New Organon, New Atlantis, exactly. So there's a lot of different philosophers that kind of play into that in the time of Enlightenment and all that. But Rosicrucians are kind of overlooked, but they play an important role because they really start to focus on this book, Rosicrucian Enlightenment. She actually posits that it was in fact the Rosicrucians that had a majority influence on the philosophy kind of in the background of the Enlightenment itself. And their idea was, and they had to have secret societies at that time because, well, we can't have it public. This is too right. Edgy. Everybody can't understand this. And the idea was through viewing man as kind of a chemical process himself. This is where basically alchemy eventually turns into supposedly chemistry, right? It's because the older ideas of alchemy are more tied up with metaphysical notions and kind of, astrological charts and sympathies and all this kind of stuff. Well, eventually that supposedly gets shed. But to me, it looks like scientism never really shed the superstition and the philosophy, right? Because it's always had this grand narrative story about it. It's always had this myth that kind of underlies it. Even if you get into people like Dawkins, Hitchens, Neil deGrasse Tyson, all the sort of modern proponents of this, Lawrence Krauss, the story is still kind of the same, that we're all part of this cosmic, sort of evolutionary process, and it's all gonna, it's a determined thing that's going to lead to man transcending his limitations, his transcending of death, etc. So by about the 1920s, I know I'm jumping around, but as we come up into the 1920s, there was a movement called the technocrats. It was kind of a fringe movement, and I think some of it's like Elon Musk's grandfather or something like that was involved in this movement back then, and then kind of didn't gain a lot of traction. But I think the advances in technology kind of reinvigorated it. People thought, oh yes, maybe we can create this sort of rational republic that's based around technocracy, that we can have computers running everything. So by the 50s and 60s, you had a lot of these elites, a lot of the social engineers, a lot of the planners beginning to say, yes, we can create this. Of course, Brzezinski's book famously says it, Between Two Ages. I was just looking back at that the other day when we did that report on the InfoWars. I had forgotten that he says that we'll have Skynet computers running everything. That's within the first 20 pages. He says that, yeah. And then, of course, Quigley says it in his middle chapter in Tragedy and Hope. He says, yes, in the near future, you'll have computers running cities and running everything. So that's the idea, is that technology is the key. It holds the secrets of nature. Not everybody in those, working in tech or engineering, thing, they don't all have these sort of esoteric views, but a lot of them have had esoteric views. Newton was a big time proponent of alchemy.
Yeah.
The father of rocketry, what's his name?
Goddard.
The other guy, the father of the jet propulsion. He was a Crowleyan. What's his name?
The former Nazi.
Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons was a big Crowleyan, the JPL laboratory. So in other words, many people have been influenced by these sort of occult philosophies. And I know people wouldn't, I'll shut up after this, but I know people wouldn't think about it. But, when Dawkins comes out and says that he has no problem with pantheism and he has no problem with aliens, I mean, he's essentially admitting this point, right? I mean, he may not actually believe those things, but what I'm getting at is just that the line between science and metaphysics is actually there's not a clear demarcation when these people actually start talking.
No, I mean, one thing I'm struck by is your comment that they believe that the earth, and that in a way all of existence by nature is somehow evil, and that we're somehow imprisoned by that, and that we need to break out of that somehow by creating this new consciousness, this new Superman. It's a very antinomian view. It's also Gnostic in nature.
Absolutely.
In Judaism, it sort of wormed its way into the fabric through the false messiahship of Shabtai Zvi. That's a whole big subject. But the thing is that it is completely contrary to the Judeo-Christian view, which was emanated from Sinai, which is that the Lord God created a world order, if you will, a logos is what the Greeks called it,
Mhm.
and what Christianity made into a faith very brilliantly. I mean, they took this sort of amoral idea, and that basically we are here to understand the nature of the world, not change it, not transcend it, but to understand it and to naturally harness its forces for the good, to improve human life, to improve our ability, our function, and to know God, not to try to subvert the world and create a separate existence, a separate reality, which, by the
Right.
way, is impossible, and attempts to do so have been catastrophic.
Right.
But you've made a nice kind of lineage of this, showing how this, and it's always done in secret, because if people knew what the hell was going on, they would throw it out. I mean, Satan operates in the shadows. When Satan is exposed to daylight, he's defeated. So they always operate, even hiding it from themselves, not just from everyone else. So you do have the infiltration of secret societies, and there's nothing wrong necessarily with secretness either. We all have, I mean, that's part of human nature as long as it's for the good. But there's a vulnerability when you become secret to corruptions, and especially when you have organizations that are openly, or at least secretly, for the purpose of a corruption. And we're not just talking about crime organizations like organized crime and the mafia, which is obvious, and which also, by the way, has an interesting intersection with all of these.
Yes.
But we're talking about, like you say, the Rosicrucians, the charcoal eaters of northern Italy, and the early communist groups in Russia that were inspired by Italian communists, the Jacobin Club, which hatched the French Revolution, or at least it co-opted the French Revolution, which actually was a very pro-America revolution originally.
Right.
The Weishaupt and the Illuminati, all of it. And I think we can say that there has been not necessarily a literal, but at least a philosophical continuation from ancient times, where you had, as you say, the big, mystery Babylon, right up till today, where you have people who are in very influential positions of wealth or influence or culture, who do tend to conduct their affairs outside of public view, and who are embracing these ideas that nature can be transcended and they can create this new kind of nature. One of their Pied Pipers, as we just mentioned earlier, was Darwin. The idea that man is not created in the image of God, but that man is nothing but an animal, a bag of bones.
Yes.
And that you therefore have a moral obligation to evolve man into a superior being. Now, that brings us up, as you say, to the transhumanism movement of today, which is totally infused by what you're talking about regarding technocracy and the use of modern technologies, because now they really have an enormous sense of power, because they believe that they've harnessing these technologies that can do things like run satellites that can look at somebody's license plate and inject people possibly with chips and do these things that really will control the world, and very well may end up controlling the world if we're not careful. So that's where we are.
Yeah. I just remember too, there was a point I wanted to say that when we were at the beginning, when we were talking about satanic in pop culture, I forgot to mention that I went back and I was reading some of the analyses of how the CIA used pop culture in the Cold War. That's a big key to figuring that out, because the auspices were that, well, if we use modern art, if we use abstract art, if we use basically sort of, as you said, antinomian principles in art, it's kind of this idea that there's not any truth, there's not any meaning, there's not any order. Art is merely emotive, right? It's all just whatever you feel, which I think is a clear departure from kind of what art is supposed to be, what it's at least always historically been in the ancient world, or well, that's more nuanced, I know that, but I don't think amongst in the classic idea of what art is, that you have this rejection of order, symmetry, meaning, purpose. And I'm not trying to be some sort of weirdo that has a puritanical view of art. I think you can do different types of art that, brings in the surreal, brings in the imaginative. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But the point is that there was a conscious decision to weaponize art in that period, whereby they began to put money into people like Jackson Pollock,
Yes.
Andy Warhol.
He was on the CIA payroll, wasn't
Exactly, right. And so they had created this thing called the Congress of Cultural Freedom. It had nothing to do with the arts. It was all just about testing out how this would affect the population in the Cold War, because it was supposed to be pitted against Soviet cosmism and realism, right? Because Soviet art had this philosophy too, where, oh, you can only do this and this and this because it only has to reflect reality. It can't have these, imaginative or abstract things going on. Anyway, interesting, just sort of how, but what that shows is that art was immediately taken up into the psychological warfare that was going on at the time. And that's not to say that I think that Soviet philosophy is correct. I don't think it's correct. I think there was two incorrect sort of dialectical positions going on there. But what came out of that was a groundwork had been laid, and there was groundwork prior to that. Of course, a lot of films, a lot of art had previously, of course, been conducted with secret state funding all the way back to the 1920s and so forth. Everybody kind of did this. The Germans did it with their, when they produced the camera, they put out propaganda films. US made tons of movies that were propaganda. So it's always existed, but there seemed to be this real ramping up of using culture in the Cold War, to the extent that the CIA even went to and talked to the French deconstructionists. Just you wouldn't think there would be any. Why would they be talking to Derrida and these sort of crazy, postmodernists? But postmodernism was even sort of brought into the Cold War because they thought that anything that would be useful against the Soviets could be brought in. Anyway, that's.
No, I mean, I think that first of all, I think it's always been a strain in art to push against, reality, to be extremely abstract, to basically stir someone up and to be edgy. I don't have a problem with that. That's just part of the deal. Not all art, but some. The problem I have is that these ideas were harnessed by official organs and done so secretly,
exactly,
as a way to subvert. Maybe art itself can be subversive. I get that. I mean, Picasso's Guernica was very subversive in terms of showing the horrors of war, and did so abstractly, but when you see it, you know what it is. And, that's to me an interesting thing. It does raise consciousness. Same thing with certain symphonic works, as well. The problem is that when these things are, harnessed for real official questionable purposes by a more official culture, and done so secretly. Now, the issue of transhumanism, I think that it pretty much, in the modern manifestation, putting aside Julian Huxley, and that, he really, I think, could be seen as the father of it.
Yeah.
It really got started right here where I am in Boston, at MIT particularly. And you had Ray Kurzweil, who is still there. I think he's retired now. Brilliant scientist. In the 1990s and 1980s, he developed the talking book, which was for Stevie Wonder. He read a book. You put the book in and it would read it. But he went on to found this institute that really went way off the edge, I think, in terms of trying to create a new kind of a human being that would be a combination of living and computer elements. And that this new human being would have cosmic consciousness. They would be able to recall any fact, millions of things. They would have the brain of a computer, that they would live to be 200 because they would have constant monitoring of their health and all aspects of it, and corrections and whatever was needed to be done. And in a way they would, they would look perfect. It kind of is like the Nazi Übermensch in many ways. And that they did view this as would be an evolved species that could eventually procreate and could actually create the next rung in Darwin's chain of evolution. And I think that has been the underlying philosophy of the transhumanist movement, of which Jeffrey Epstein was a major part here in Boston. The head professor at the Media Center had to resign because of his associations with Epstein. And before his resignation, on their website, he had all kinds of stuff about what exactly I'm talking about, very openly. I mean, transhumanism, it's the new future of man, and it's going to cure all disease. Nothing wrong with curing disease, but the point is they were trying to use it in a way to do something that would have evolved man and that would have marginalized populations that were seen as less evolved, which has always been the darker side of this whole agenda. And Darwin, by the way, owned that.
Yeah.
He did use the term survival of the fittest in one of the later editions of his book. And he was inspired by Herbert Spencer, who was the American ambassador for Darwinism. But I know you've done some talk on that. Where are we with the transhumanist movement right now?
Well, I was looking into, I went back and I read Ghost in the Machine. Well, not the whole book, but I'd read it many years ago, and I reread the chapters that are relevant to transhumanism at the end of Ghost in the Machine that Kessler wrote. And he projected that by the time that we're living right now, we would be seeing precisely what we're seeing. And he had mentioned, in fact, that the government will have to do these secret programs because, of course, the public's too stupid. They can't understand this stuff. So the government will have to secretly put drugs in the water and in the food, even to the extent that he says the culture will have to be degenerated. We'll have to manipulate and do things backdoor through medicine. And I'm not trying to be overly tinfoil hatter. I mean, I know there's nothing wrong with medicine. I just went to the clinic the other day. I'm not a Luddite. I think there's nothing wrong with modern medicine. But the point is that when you've got, these groups that specifically say, Free Tough Copper is another one of these global elites who wrote a book, Turning Point, and he said, we'll use medicine to bring a lot of this in. Jacques Attali said, we'll bring this in through medicine. So a lot of these guys have said the medical arena will be one of the key ways to bring in a lot of the experimentation. But where exactly we are with transhumanism is a difficult question, because a lot of that, as many know, a lot of that tech is secret. So I don't know exactly how far they've gotten with some of it. I have read like Annie Jacobson's History of DARPA book, and she kind of outlines a lot of where that might be going.
They'll have their, chips, whatever it is. I mean, 60 Minutes just did a piece where they talked about DARPA, and they had a scientist.
Yes, I saw that. Yep.
Yeah, right at the Pentagon, Halperin, his name, who held up a chip and said, "Oh, we're working on this. We're going to have this ready. It's going to be done very soon." So, people like me, who they say are conspiracy theorists with tin hats, who have been talking about this for a long time, now it's been vindicated. I mean, this isn't a secret anymore. 60 Minutes, you can't get more establishment than that. So it is happening. In a sense, even your smartphone, which is a wonderful instrument, I see you're looking at it right now.
No, I was actually looking for a text. I'm looking in scripture that I was going to mention to you. I know it's not in your canon, but
not at all.
I think it's in Third Maccabees.
Yeah,
there's a story where I think it's either in Second Maccabees or Third Maccabees, but Third Maccabees is Ptolemy.
Yeah,
and he tries to mark everybody with a tattoo, and they can't buy or sell. Right, when he's oppressing the Jews, and they can't buy or sell unless they have this tattoo. And I had forgotten that's like kind of a type of thing that, in the Christian scriptures in the Apocalypse, John mentions Nero. I think he's talking about Nero. Nero tried to do a similar thing where he would mark people in the Roman Empire with a sort of a tattoo, and you couldn't buy or sell unless you had this tattoo that signified that you worship the emperor.
It had everything to do with the Maccabean revolt.
Yes.
I mean, among other things. I mean, they were putting, statues of Zeus in the temple, and nude, athletics and all of it. It was a rejection of the entire Greek thing. And it was a civil war between two Jewish factions, not only a war against the Syrian Greeks.
But the compromisers.
That's right. And the fact that they won that war is actually a victory for all of humanity, because it was a victory for sovereignty against a New World Order type empire who was oppressing people. I think that this also occurs to me. I mean, just out of the blue, the American Revolution, the Stamp Act, right? You had to have a stamp put on every purchase, every transaction.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Right. I mean, this isn't new. We have this probably has popped up in cultures and in situations throughout history right up till today, that you have to, in a way, have the indicia of the state in order to function. This is now we have, vaccine passports. I don't want to go too far into that subject because I'll get banned on YouTube, but
Right.
these are all things that fall in line with this idea that if you do, communist China, I don't think it's a secret that they have social scores for
Right.
people and businesses. If you don't have a good enough social score in China, you can't get food. You can't go out of your community. You can't get any rights. And I heard it mentioned here in Boston by Jeff Cooner, who is a big talk show host here, not some, fringe show here, WRKO, 50,000 watt station, that he's heard that this whole business of Delta Airlines and Coca-Cola boycotting Georgia for passing election laws, the legislature, it has to do with the fact that this idea of the social score is now here, and that Google and Facebook and all the big players, they're giving companies social scores, and they divide it up into three areas. It's what is it? It's E, J, and G. E is for the environment, S is for social justice or socialism, and G is for governance. And they have to have a high enough score in all of these areas in order to get all of the benefits of being online and of being, getting all of the who knows what. And if they don't add up to that, then they're off of the social list. And the idea of lying about the state of Georgia regulating their own elections is high on the list of S's. It's like, E is supporting global warming.
Oh, wow.
We can look at any number of categories. It's all part of this reset, part of the Marxist agenda. So, this is what's happening now with the control by the international elites. And I think it was George Gilder predicted this, a very well-respected intellectual who had spent several years in China, I think as part of the Bush administration. I remember hearing him do an interview a couple of years ago, I think it was on NPR, where he said, China is giving social scores, and that is coming to the United States.
Wow.
And at the time, I'm like, oh, that could never happen here. I mean, we're Americans. We wouldn't tolerate that.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, think about this past year and tell me what we tolerate.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you realize that when you have a so-called crisis situation, as a lot of analysts have said, you can get a lot more social engineering done a lot faster, right?
Yeah.
Because the crisis provides the sort of, justification for all the overreaching measures, the violation of constitutional law, all that kind of stuff can just be bypassed because, but it's a crisis, and it's the same modus operandi of the scientism crowd with ends justify the means, right? Alfred Kinsey, doing the horrible things he did. Oh, well, it's okay because it's for science and it's for the greater good, right? Down the road of the greater good. So these become Pandora box, opening Pandora's box justifications that then destroy all ethics. You can't have ethics at all if everything can just be justified by, down the road, it's for the good. So it's sad, it's self-destructive, and I agree. I think that the plan that the thing they're trying to bring in is so fundamentally unnatural and against, as you said, human nature, and even the fact that things have natures, right? I mean, one thing that the medieval philosophers, whether it's